For 30 years, Johnny Carson ruled late-night television. From behind his desk at The Tonight Show, he wasn't just America's bedtime companion, he was the gatekeeper of stardom. One appearance could make a career. One laugh from Johnny could crown you a legend. But Carson was not an easy man to impress. Off stage, he was famously private, guarded, even distant. On stage, he hid behind wit and timing, rarely letting the audience see his heart. Yet, there were a rare few who broke through. Guests who weren't just funny, or talented, or famous, but who reached something deeper inside Johnny himself. They made him laugh when no one else could. They reminded him of why he had chosen this life in the first place, and in the rarest of moments, they even made him cry. He never admitted it publicly, but he kept a quiet, unspoken list. 9 guests who weren't just great television, they were unforgettable. Tonight, we open that list. The legends Johnny Carson truly loved. When Lucille Ball stepped through the curtain, the atmosphere of The Tonight Show shifted instantly. Johnny Carson, usually composed and measured, would relax in his chair the moment Lucy entered, his shoulders dropping, his eyes brightening. She wasn't just another guest hoping to charm the host. She was a force of nature who took over the room before she even spoke. Her laugh alone, full-bodied, booming, and just a little reckless, was enough to derail Johnny's carefully planned rhythm. He loved that. For a man who thrived on control, who guarded his timing with precision, Lucy represented the one thing he secretly craved on live television: unpredictability. In commercial breaks, while most guests sat quietly, Lucy turned the stage into her playground. She would balance on the edge of the cables, wink at the cue card guy, or perform a pratfall so sharp the boom operator nearly dropped his mic. Cameras might not be rolling, but Lucy believed the show never stopped. If there was a heartbeat in the room, there was an audience to entertain. Carson admired that philosophy because it reminded him of his own early days in comedy, when laughter meant more than format, when survival depended on instinct. On air, she was pure electricity. One moment, she'd tell a story about a disastrous rehearsal, and in the next, she'd tumble into physical comedy so flawless that Johnny's prepared questions would evaporate on his tongue. He didn't mind. He let her lead, happy to be the rhythm section while she played the solo. With Lucy, interviews felt less like conversation and more like jazz. Johnny would lay down the beat, and she would riff until the walls shook. What made her presence unforgettable wasn't just her talent, it was her care. After tapings, Lucy stayed behind. She learned the names of the crew. She thanked the lighting technicians for making a redhead look human. She told the stage manager he ran a tighter ship than any Hollywood director she'd ever worked with. She signed napkins for interns and encouraged a nervous researcher to try stand-up just once. Johnny noticed. He respected it even if he never said it aloud. For Carson, Lucy was more than a guest. She was the reminder of what live television could be when it was messy, dangerous, and joyous all at once. She made him lose control, and for Johnny Carson, that was the greatest gift of all. When she left the stage, her hair blazing under the lights, the mischief still crackling in the air, Johnny would settle back behind the desk, exhale, and feel something he rarely allowed himself to feel on live TV. Pure joy, unedited and real. When Bob Hope visited The Tonight Show, Johnny Carson didn't prepare his questions the way he usually did. He didn't need to. With Hope, the script didn't matter because the rhythm was already set. Their conversations weren't interviews. They were prize fights, clean and sharp, each exchange like a jab and counterpunch. Johnny would toss a setup with the precision of a boxer's lead hook, and Bob would snap back with a one-liner so tight it felt carved from stone. Then came the tags. Rapid, relentless, stacking one after another until the audience was gasping for air between laughs. Carson loved that kind of efficiency. No wasted words. No flab. Hope's lines had been tested on countless stages, in war zones, in ballrooms, in theaters across the country. They weren't guesses. They were weapons, honed and flawless. Johnny admired that craft. He respected it, the way a magician respects another magician who never reveals his trick. Backstage, The chemistry between the two men felt just as natural. Hope would arrive early, not with an entourage, but with golf stories. He'd talk about sand traps and long drives, stories that would later sneak their way onto the broadcast disguised as jokes. Johnny appreciated that. For a host who dealt with endless celebrities chasing the spotlight, it mattered that Bob Hope didn't come to use the stage. He came to play the game. On air, the energy was undeniable. Carson would ask about the tour, about Hollywood, about politics, and Hope would glide straight into a punchline. If the setup was light, he'd spike it with an unexpected jab. If Johnny leaned serious, Hope would twist it into a laugh that kept the audience in his palm. Johnny's eyes always gave him away, a mischievous flicker, a grin that said, "There it is." He didn't try to top Hope. He didn't need to. He just fed the next pitch and enjoyed the sparring match. What Johnny valued most was Hope's balance. His humor was sharp, but never cruel, pointed, but never bitter. He could roast a senator without leaving a scar, tease Johnny without undermining him, kid about fame while still admitting he loved it. That balance mattered to Carson, who wanted The Tonight Show to feel like a place families could share together, laughter that didn't need to be explained or censored. Backstage, Hope extended the same courtesy to everyone. He remembered names. He shook hands with the prop guy. He told the stage manager a joke like he was tipping him for a job well done. Johnny noticed those details. For him, a guest wasn't only judged by the laughs they delivered, but by how they treated the crew. And Hope, every time, passed that test. When the segment ended, there was no sentimentality, no long embraces, just the nod of two craftsmen who had landed the plane. As the band played him off, Johnny would glance at Bob with a quiet admiration reserved for equals. For Carson, those nights with Bob Hope were the closest television ever came to feeling like a sport, but for the sheer love of the work. Two men in their prime trading blows, not for glory. When Jack Benny appeared on The Tonight Show, he didn't rush onto the stage. He drifted, unhurried, almost as if time itself slowed to match his pace. The audience leaned in before he even spoke. Carson, who prized sharpness and control, straightened in his chair because he knew what was coming. Wasn't ordinary comedy. With Benny, the joke was never just in the punchline, it was in the silence, the wait, the delicate pause that stretched so long the room had no choice but to laugh. Johnny admired that control because it was the rare kind he couldn't imitate. He was a craftsman of timing himself. But Benny's timing felt like a clock you couldn't see, only feel. On air, Carson would toss an easy setup, expecting a quick return, but Benny wouldn't bite. He'd sit in stillness, his expression frozen in mock vanity or exaggerated disbelief, a single eyebrow twitching toward the audience. The cameras seemed to hold their breath. The band fell quiet, and just when it felt unbearable, Benny would release the line. The laugh would crash like a wave, bigger than the words deserved, because Benny had made the crowd wait for it. Carson studied those moments like a masterclass. He wasn't trying to outdo Benny. He was learning from him in real time. The genius wasn't in the joke. It was in the architecture around it. Backstage, Benny's obsession with precision never stopped. He'd ask the stagehand to lower a stool by an inch, not for comfort, but because the rhythm of sitting demanded it. He'd glance at a monologue card and quietly suggest cutting a word so the beat would land cleaner. He didn't theorize about comedy. He engineered the environment until comedy became inevitable. Johnny respected that deeply. Most stars relied on charm or flash to carry them. Benny relied on trust, the invisible partnership he had built with audiences over decades. They knew his persona, polite, vain, a little stingy, and because they knew it, they supplied half the joke themselves. When he paused, they filled the silence with expectation, and that expectation made the laugh twice as strong when it finally came. Carson admired how Benny didn't chase the audience. He let them come to him. During commercial breaks, Benny conserved his energy. A nod to the camera operator, a grin for the makeup artist, a quiet, "How's your night?" to the stage manager. No wasted performance, no forced charm. He saved the magic for the stage, and when it arrived, it felt inevitable. Johnny admitted privately that whenever he slowed his own delivery, whenever he let a laugh breathe longer than usual, he was tipping his hat to Jack Benny. It wasn't imitation, it was reverence, because Benny showed him that if you respect the audience, you give them time. And if you master that time, you can own the laugh without ever raising your voice. On those nights, Carson wasn't just hosting a show. He was honoring a man who had turned silence into the loudest punchline in television history. When Ella Fitzgerald sang on The Tonight Show, the entire room changed. The audience leaned forward, the band tightened its focus, and Johnny Carson, usually quick with quips, fell silent. He didn't interrupt, didn't riff, didn't try to slip in a clever tag. He simply watched, his eyes fixed on Ella, as if the music itself had suspended time. Ella didn't enter like a diva, demanding attention. She came modestly, a quick smile at Johnny, a nod to the band, and then that first note, round, effortless, and pure. It wasn't performance for applause, it was truth in sound, carried by a voice that seemed too natural to have been trained, yet too perfect to be accidental. Carson lived for precision, and Ella's precision fascinated him because it wasn't mechanical. It was human. Every phrase carried a story, every breath chosen with care. When she slipped into scat, the band answered instinctively, finishing her sentences like old friends, and Johnny's grin revealed his awe. For him, it was the highest form of craft. Nothing wasted, everything earned. Offstage, the myth shrank, and the person grew larger. Ella didn't sweep through the studio with demands or entourages. She thanked the monitor engineer for a clean mix. She told the makeup artist she had a light touch. She asked the stagehand how his week was going, and she meant it. If an intern edged forward nervously with a program to sign, she held the pen with both hands, as if the autograph was a shared honor. Johnny noticed. For a man who judged people as much by how they treated the crew as by how they played to the cameras, Ella's humility was like a superpower. On the couch, she didn't boast about fame or records. She spoke softly about the road, about musicians who taught her to listen before she sang, about audiences who didn't need fireworks to feel wonder. Johnny rarely pressed her with questions. He didn't have to. The music had already said everything. When she finished, the applause rolled through the studio like thunder, and Carson would lean back, exhale, almost relieved. Relieved that, for one rare moment, the show wasn't about ratings or laughs. It was about honesty. Ella Fitzgerald gave Carson something beyond entertainment. She created a space where no one was competing, where the audience didn't feel sold to, where television itself seemed to dissolve and become music. And when she walked off the stage, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of warmth, grace, and the quiet understanding that something true had just happened. Johnny would shuffle his cards, glance at the camera, and smile with a calm that couldn't be faked. Because with Ella Fitzgerald, The Tonight Show wasn't just television, it was art. Dean Martin never walked onto The Tonight Show set the way other guests did. He sauntered, tie loosened, drink in hand, a grin spread across his face that promised trouble. Johnny Carson, who guarded his format and valued control, would lean back in his chair the second Dean appeared. He knew the plan was about to vanish, and he loved it. Dean thrived in the mess. He'd interrupt Johnny mid-sentence with a half-sung line, tease Ed McMahon until the man doubled over, or ramble through a story so loosely that the audience should have been lost. But they weren't, because Dean's rambling was the act. He'd stumble through a punchline, pause, smirk at the crowd, and somehow make the laugh twice as strong. The secret wasn't polish, it was confidence. Dean didn't mind looking foolish because he knew his magnetism carried the room. Johnny, who hated when guests fumbled and dragged down momentum, never worried with Dean. He trusted the chaos. Their banter wasn't rehearsed, it was jazz. Johnny would pitch a line, Dean would toss it back crooked and cracked, and together they made something alive, risky, and fun. Backstage, Dean was no different. He'd wink at the camera crew, toast the band leader with an invisible glass, and lean over to whisper something outrageous to the stage manager just to watch him blush. Johnny respected that spirit. It wasn't arrogance. It was generosity wrapped in mischief. Dean didn't hog the spotlight. He spread it. He made the room feel like a party where everyone had a seat at the table. For a man like Carson, who often shouldered the burden of keeping the show tight, Dean's presence was a reminder that television didn't have to be perfect. It just had to be fun. And it was fun. Every time Dean dropped into the chair, the studio transformed into a late-night bar with millions watching, and Johnny wasn't the host anymore. He was the buddy across the table, laughing until his eyes watered. When Dean finally sauntered off, leaving behind a trail of laughter and looseness, Johnny would lean back, cards forgotten, with the grin of a man who had just been reminded of the simplest truth in show business. When you stop taking yourself too seriously, the audience loves you even more. Jimmy Stewart didn't need flash, music cues, or grand entrances. He walked onto Johnny Carson's stage slowly, shoulders slightly stooped, voice already softening the air before he reached the chair. In a world of polished punchlines and rehearsed anecdotes, Stewart brought something rarer: sincerity. Johnny, who thrived on quick wit and sharp timing, adjusted his rhythm whenever Stewart was around. With most guests, he was ready with a quip, a comeback, or a setup. With Jimmy, he stayed quiet. He let the man talk, because Stewart's voice carried weight that no joke could top. His stories meandered like front porch conversations. A hesitant, "well," to begin, a pause to recall the detail, then a slow unfurling of memory. Maybe about a small-town neighbor, maybe about the war, maybe about his dog. The audience didn't just laugh, they leaned in, caught by the cadence of a man who seemed incapable of insincerity. Carson respected that deeply. He was a master of control. But Stewart reminded him that sometimes the bravest thing a host could do was let go. The moment that sealed Stewart's place on Johnny's private list came when he read a poem about his beloved dog Bo. The studio grew still. Johnny leaned forward, and as Stewart's voice wavered with emotion, something happened that almost never occurred on The Tonight Show. Carson's composure cracked, his eyes filled, his throat caught, and America watched the unshakable king of late night weep openly. For Johnny, that wasn't weakness, it was truth, and he never forgot who had unlocked it. Offstage, Stewart was the same man. He greeted crew with warmth, asked about families, remembered names. There was no divide between the star and the person. Johnny valued that consistency. In Hollywood, where ego often drowned out decency, Jimmy's humility felt like an anchor. He embodied the kind of America Carson still believed in. Johnny wasn't just the host of a TV show, steady, kind, unpretentious. Every time Stewart visited, he was a boy from Nebraska, sitting across from a man who reminded him why decency mattered. He was grounding, a reminder that television, at its best, for Carson, Jimmy Stewart wasn't just a guest, could still honor humanity over spectacle. George Burns didn't need to chase the spotlight when he visited The Tonight Show. He carried it in quietly, like a man carrying a well-worn cigar and an old friend's smile. The audience trusted him before he even spoke, and Johnny Carson trusted him too. Burns's comedy was elegance disguised as ease. He didn't rush. He didn't squeeze. He placed jokes the way a host sets fine crystal, deliberate, careful, inviting. He'd take a draw from his cigar, peer over his glasses, let the silence hold for just a beat too long, then deliver the line so neat you could hear the laugh click into place. Johnny loved that craftsmanship. He admired the invisible scaffolding of Burns's timing, the rhythm of micro beats that trained the audience to laugh on cue without ever feeling coached. Backstage, the man matched the myth. Burns greeted the security guard, shook the prop master's hand, whispered a one-liner to a stagehand like a gift, and moved on with a nod. By the time he reached the chair, the entire crew stood taller. Johnny noticed. He always measured guests by the way the room felt after they left, and Burns left it warmer. Then there was Sammy Davis Jr., the other side of the coin. If Burns was class, Sammy was electricity. His entrances felt like lightning striking the studio. Johnny's smile widened before Sammy even sat down because he knew what was coming. Energy, rhythm, and joy so powerful it spilled past the cameras. Sammy never stayed still. He tapped rhythms on the chair, slid into impressions so flawless They left the audience gasping, or tossed off a joke mid-song without missing a beat. Carson didn't try to keep up. He leaned back, grinning like a fan at the best seat in the house. But beneath the sparkle, Sammy carried something Johnny valued most: generosity. He didn't use the stage as a pedestal. He treated it like a party, making everyone in the room a guest of honor. He hugged stagehands, taught interns dance steps, cracked jokes with the makeup artist, and spun the whole studio into motion before the first camera rolled. Johnny loved that. It wasn't about ego. It was about lifting the entire room. Together, Burns and Davis showed Carson two truths of show business. Burns proved that comedy could be dignified, timeless, and steady. Sammy reminded him that performance should be alive, unpredictable, and joyful. Between them, Johnny found balance, elegance and chaos, courtesy and fire. And every time they left, he knew The Tonight Show had given him not just a segment, but a memory that no script could manufacture. Betty White didn't walk onto Johnny Carson's stage asking for space. She created it with a smile. The second she appeared, the audience leaned forward as if they were in on a secret. And Johnny, who respected sharp minds and flawless timing, adjusted himself in his chair. He knew exactly what was about to happen. From the first exchange, Betty matched him beat for beat. Johnny would toss a sly setup, expecting to control the laugh, and Betty would catch it clean, flip it, and send it back with a punchline sharper and longer than anyone expected. It wasn't just her wit, it was her confidence. She didn't rush, didn't force, didn't try to outpace him. She met Johnny exactly where he lived, dry, nimble, and a little dangerous, and then nudged him one step further. Their chemistry wasn't competition, it was play, and Carson valued that trust more than most people realized, because Betty's humor had bite, but it never drew blood. She could poke at Johnny's ego, prod the boys' club atmosphere of late night, and turn a harmless anecdote into a sly joke about power, all while making everyone feel included. That balance, sharp but warm, made her irreplaceable. Johnny admired it because so many guests swung wildly and missed. Betty never missed. She tapped the ball, placed it exactly where she wanted, and strolled to first base with ease. Off camera, Betty was just as remarkable. When the segment ended, she didn't dash for the exit. She stayed. She asked the stage manager how his day was going. She thanked the camera operators for the close-ups. She chatted with interns like they were old friends. If a makeup artist apologized for fussing, Betty would joke that the mirror was the real diva. These weren't stunts, they were habits. The crew adored her because she noticed them, remembered their pets even. Once, a sound technician mentioned his dog was sick. Weeks later, Betty returned, and the first thing she asked was, "How's your pup?" Johnny saw all of it, and for a man who measured people not by their applause, but by their kindness to those unseen, Betty stood out more than almost anyone. On air, she gave Johnny freedom. He could try weirder tags, risk bolder asides, because he trusted she'd always catch him. That kind of trust was rare in television, rarer still when it felt this light, this easy. Watching them together was like watching two musicians trade solos without ever stepping on each other's notes. When the band played out and the applause rolled over the studio, Johnny's grin said everything. If he could, he would have booked Betty every week. Because she wasn't just funny, she made the show feel good. And for Carson, that was the highest standard a guest could reach. Looking back, Johnny's unspoken list makes perfect sense. He didn't love guests for their fame. He loved them for their craft, their timing, their generosity. Lucille Ball showed him that chaos, when driven by heart, could turn television into pure joy. Bob Hope reminded him that a clean punchline, delivered with perfect rhythm, could feel like a friendly prize fight. Jack Benny proved that silence, respected and stretched, could thunder louder than any punchline. Ella Fitzgerald brought humility to genius, singing with a grace that made television dissolve into music. Dean Martin loosened the screws, proving that imperfection could be more entertaining than polish. Jimmy Stewart cracked Johnny's armor and reminded him that sincerity was sometimes stronger than comedy. George Burns wrapped humor in elegance, a lesson in dignity that comedy rarely carried anymore. Sammy Davis Jr. electrified the studio, lifting every single person until the whole building buzzed, and Betty White balanced sharpness with grace, giving Johnny freedom while treating the crew like family. Together, these 9 gave Carson something he rarely admitted he needed: reassurance that the job wasn't just about jokes, applause, or ratings. It was about moments that felt true, about hosting a room where kindness, timing, and generosity ruled the night. When the cameras shut off and Studio One exhaled, Johnny wasn't counting laughs. He was tallying memories, measuring the rare occasions when television captured something honest, something human, something that didn't need editing. For him, those moments were the reason he stayed behind the desk for 3 decades. And for us, they remain the reason we still remember The Tonight Show, not just as television, but as history. If you grew up watching, you can probably feel those moments even now. So here's your turn. Which of these guests would you book every week? Which clip would you show to someone who's never seen Carson in his prime? Drop your pick in the comments. And if this journey through late night's golden age struck a chord, tap like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss what's next. Because in the end, Johnny Carson's greatest gift wasn't just the laughs he delivered. It was the rare, unforgettable feeling that when the lights came up, you were part of something true.